situation. This is the second in a series, the Open Gates lecture series called Global Problems, Obstacles, and Opportunities. Mr. Starr, Jonathan Starr, certainly fits into this theme very well, looking at both the obstacles and the opportunities. I don't want to steal his thunder, but he certainly knows a lot about both of these. And his particular area, as a lot of the students know, is Africa and Somaliland in particular. I think often people look at the situation in Africa and they think that it's remote, distant from their own lives. Not really true. We're all connected in one way or another. If readers of Laurie Garrett's book called The Coming Plague, Newly Emerging Diseases in a World Out of Balance, know what I'm talking about. She paints a very scary scenario where health issues, civil war, poverty, in any place in the world affects every other place in the world, in Africa in particular. Some of the most deadly diseases in the world lurk there. We can board a plane and come from Somaliland to Boston in how many hours? A lot. Not in terms of a virus, right? You can be in Tokyo in 20 hours. So the situation, things happening around the world affect all of us in a global age, in jet travel, connections of people and commodities. Again, Jonathan Starr is here to talk about Africa and the failure of aid work, a very vital topic. Jonathan Starr graduated from Worcester Academy in 1994, and he went immediately into business, and he founded the Flag Street Capital, a fund on Wall Street, and eventually decided he wanted to do something, give back, to pick a cause. And somehow he ended up in Somaliland. And as Mr. Isaacson said, we still don't know why that happened, so you're going to have to explain that part. But he founded a school in Somaliland called Abasco Tech. And many of the students in the audience have been blogging and sending video back and forth to the students in Somaliland. And I think they've learned a lot. We had Mr. Starr in our class yesterday, and we Skyped in with one of his students in Africa. It was quite an interesting and valuable experience for all of us. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jonathan Starr back to the Hill.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the nice introduction. We're going to talk about the aid industry. And yesterday, we did this joint class of mine has been talking to, from Somaliland, has been talking to a class that John has here. And in the process, they've been videoing, sending videos back and forth, and communicating back and forth. And yesterday, we actually had a Skype call with one. And you could see just how talented this kid was here. Our kid from Somaliland was more than holding her own in what is her third language. She speaks Somali and Arabic more than she speaks English. And what is her third language is perfectly able to hold her own and actually very much direct a class. It was a good thing to see. And a lot of what, well, as I get into this presentation, you'll see there's a lot that people can sell of this need, this hope, all these great things that you can do to save these struggling children that are somewhere else. And I want to talk today about the realities of the situation, as opposed to just what you see on TV and all the sadness, all the desperation and all that. I want to actually talk about something real, because getting Suleika, this girl, on the phone with students at Worcester Academy and getting the connection back and forth and teaching her English and working through that wasn't something actually that's just going to happen just because you send $100 to save the children. And that's what I want to talk about today, the realities of the situation. So the title is The International Aid Industry built to fail. And I think you'll see why I'm saying that as we go through. So I'm going to go through my first impressions as I started to get in contact with aid workers in the aid industry. From there, I started actually doing some research and realized that it's not just me. This is an incredibly well-documented, massive failure. International aid has massively failed. Then I started looking more at it and looking and thought, wow, look at all the details of this. Analyze this. It would be amazing if it didn't fail. It would be shocking if this worked. You set this thing up to be a failure. And we're going to use a Barso Tech, which is our school, as a counterexample. We're set up in a completely different way. And then we'll go through conclusions. So, first impressions in the aid industry. The first thing is, you've all seen these ads on TV, the starving kid, flies on their face, the desperation, and they tell you just send some small amount and you can save the kid. And if that was true, that would be wonderful. If actually your 70 cents a day or whatever the thing is, actually saved the kid, of course you should do it. But just because they put the face on TV doesn't mean it's true. Now that was my first impression also. And then you hear the names of these agencies. Save the Children, CARE, HOPE, Mercy, World Food Program. They sound like these good people doing these good things, right? They care. It's even the title of their organization. The first time I went to Somaliland, I was staying in a hotel and trying to figure out what's going on. And I just end up kind of meeting up with these people. And they're these lawyers who are in from DC. And I asked, what are you doing? Oh, we're aid workers. One of us lives here full time. He's building out an office with more people. The other two of us just go back and forth. As I spent more time with them, I started realizing, well, first of all, what are you trying to do exactly? And I said, well, our job is to help fill in holes in the Constitution, the Somaliland Constitution. It's a 3-year project we have. 2 of us are going to be flying back and forth. There'll be a couple of full-time people here. Now, I come from the business world. A 3-year project to fill in holes in the Constitution is an awfully long time. I don't know how, it's not a very demanding schedule to put on somebody. When you're working with consultants, you need to be managing them on incredibly tight time frames. Not 3 years, hey, whatever it costs. So I go and meet with these people, and the big deal in Somaliland at the time was the question of the election. There was an election that was delayed. They were having technical problems, and I went with these people, and we met with the head of the National Electoral Commission. So this is a guy who should really be able to answer questions, especially to these people who are politically involved. These are politically engaged people, and this is what they're supposed to be doing, working with the government, helping them. So we go to this lunch with the National Electoral Commission. They didn't ask a single question. They said, it's a meet and greet. We kind of go around, we're talking to different people. I eventually realized these are tourists. These people are basically tourists. A year later, a friend of mine from there we were playing basketball with one of the guys, and he said to him, what do you do here? And the guy said, you find yourself a corner, and the days turn into weeks, the weeks turn into months, the months turn into years. That's the guy you're giving your money to. So from there, I said, oops, sorry. From there, I thought that there's definitely a problem here. Then, shortly after starting a Barso Tech, we had a teacher come from England, just for a month, and he happened to know somebody high up in Save the Children in the UK. And he said, I can set up a meeting with Save the Children Somaliland, the head of that. So I said, okay, do that. It's before I really understood much. So I meet with the head of Save the Children Somaliland, and I'm with him. And he says, I've met a lot of executives in my career. Every question I ask this guy, well, that's details of the business. I don't know that. That's not for me. This guy knew nothing. I mean, this guy barely knew he was in the aid business, never mind anything that actually Save the Children was doing in Somaliland. I left that meeting, and there were follow-ups we were going to do. And I said to the people, I'm going to go to these follow-ups, but it's just going to frustrate me and be a waste of time. That guy is a waste of our time. And the people, this guy from England said, I don't know what you're talking about. We're trying to help people, and this guy's job is to save the children. I said, wow, this is just, the branding has worked beautifully. You actually believe Save the Children cares about saving the children. Exxon could call themselves the whale company, save the whales. Wouldn't suddenly make that the goal. Needless to say, we had another meeting with Save the Children, where they had a bunch of follow-ups, none of which any of them ever did. They were supposed to come see our school. They've never seen our school. Now I've been there for a year and a half. They were supposed to, there's about 5 items we were supposed to work with them on. Not a single one did we ever hear from them on again. So, I then start checking out the literature. The attacks are plentiful and they come from all over the world. It is incredible how much literature is out there that talk about the failure of the NGO industry. Sorry, for those who are not familiar, NGO is this kind of ridiculous name, non-governmental organization. I don't completely even know where the name came from. I think it's because governments used to give aid and that failed. So they said, well, let's have governments give money to another organization and they'll do aid. So we'll call them non-governmental organizations. So when I first heard the name, I thought, we're all non-governmental organizations. Every organization that's not a government one would be non-governmental. So these are specifically organizations set up as charitable organizations around the world. So basically, you check the literature, they failed everywhere. Lords of Poverty. This was one that came out in the late 80s. I think this was the first major, just scathing attack. I mean, if you read it, the guy is just furious. He's been in the aid industry and he can't believe how awful this is. A guy named Graham Hancock wrote this. It is incredible, the stuff he goes through. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars spent on projects that get abandoned. Like, we're going to build this fishery, $40 million. It doesn't even exist. They leave it. There's one where he talks about, I believe it ended up that they could catch fish at $2,000 per kilo. Which if you have a really high-paying customer, I suppose that's good, but otherwise it's not a very good, that's not a very good business. So he goes through this just incredible waste, and he has just item after item. Now, he also talks about at that time, organizations that would raise money. This is actually during kind of the We Are the World phase that he's focusing a lot of this stuff. The Save Africa, people are starving in Ethiopia time. I'm not saying people weren't starving in Ethiopia, but he talks about charities that have raised 2 million pounds in England. 100,000 will get donated to actually go to Africa. I mean, so from there, the industry did change a little bit because they felt the need to at least donate some money to Africa. And now, all the focus is on this administrative overhead concept. Because Graham Hancock pointed out, a lot of times 95% of it's going to their administration, their marketing. So they now try to focus on lowering that, upping the rest. And if you ever look at a Save the Children brochure, that's what they talk about. 90% goes to the field. What you start to realize is that can completely be played with also. Plus, if you divide by zero impact, it's still not a very good ratio. Okay. A more updated one, The White Man's Burden. It's also a very good read. Basically, it says nothing's changed. Everything's still going on the exact same way. These aid workers still don't care. The projects still aren't working, so on and so on. Originally, from there, it kind of led me to, I used to debate with people. This friend of mine, he used to say, I think that they're worth about 5 cents on the dollar. And you donate $1, 5 cents probably is worth it. And he says, not because they're doing anything good, it's because some of that dollar they spend on rent and on paying salaries, so they're worth something. And I used to say, well, you could be right, but I think you're probably wrong, because there's a little bit of a negative impact too. It's not a small negative either. In Somaliland, it's incredibly hard for us to hire a Somali teacher who's qualified. And the reason isn't that there are no Somali teachers who could possibly, there are educated Somalis there, but they all want NGO jobs. They all want to get these jobs because they pay so much. So these guys actually, yes, some money goes into the economy, but they mess up the labor market completely. And they mess up the market for a lot of things. They mess up the rental market. It's harder for other people to do business because they're bidding up the cost of the real estate. So actually, this money that's going in is not positive. If you actually spend money keeping a bunch of the talent in a room, that's not a good thing. So I thought at the time, I don't agree. I think it's slightly negative. I agree, it's got some little just accidental value it provides, but it's generally net negative. Then I read something. There's a book called The Road to Hell. It's specifically about Somalia. And this tells a story that is really remarkable and unfortunately very true, and talks about food aid. Now, food aid sounds like, how can that not be good, right? There are people in refugee camps, they're starving people, we're delivering food. How could that possibly be bad? Well, in Somalia in the 80s and the early 90s, there was a military dictator, and this was, Somaliland was part of Somalia. There's a military dictator, a guy who controlled the place, named Siad Barre. Now, it's not like World Food Program has a bunch of people and they're just physically handing all this stuff out. I mean, they send the thing to the port, they have contractors, they don't have every single bit of possible, they're not an end-to-end perfect operation, including retail shops at the end. So what did Siad Barre, what's pretty well documented in The Road to Hell, they overestimate the amount, they overstate the amount of refugees. So they say there's 1.5 million. Really, the number's probably 300,000. Even the 300,000, certainly that author argues, and from my experience this is true, the Somali clan culture is excellent at making sure people don't starve. It's a very poor country, but you don't starve. They take care of their own. So even that 300,000, if left to their own, probably would have been taken care of. But instead, we're talking massive sums of food money that come through. And they don't give this out, which you actually do in these food programs. They give the money to the governments, and the governments are supposed to sell them to the people or distribute them. So Siad Barre, the military dictator, was funding a military campaign using food aid. He didn't give this out to people for free. He took the food, sold the food, and funded a military attack on the people in the north in Somaliland. He actually funded clan warfare. There's a big argument that he actually was completely losing power. He would have fallen apart, but he could pay off the people he needed to pay off purely because of his food money. Now, how do you actually justify keeping a military, this guy leave landmines? There are people in Somalia with one leg, one arm, kids who were killed because they stepped on a landmine at some point. Why? Who laid them? Siad Barre. What money did he use? World Food Program money. And this is not any more a discussion of is it worth 5 cents on the dollar or negative. That's massively negative. Food money has also kept dictators in power all over the world. Horrible people are getting funded by this stuff. Which brings us to today. There's a group called Al-Shabaab. Has anyone, by show of hands, heard of Al-Shabaab? Okay. Al-Shabaab is basically, they're thought to be linked to Al-Qaeda. I don't know if they are other than in the news media, but Al-Shabaab is an extremist group that controls the south of Somalia. Al-Shabaab controls Mogadishu. There is a government in Mogadishu. They control about 5 blocks. It's literally true. They control about 5 blocks. Al-Shabaab controls the entire south. Now, food money is still coming through there. Tremendous amount of food aid still comes through there. It goes into a port controlled by Al-Shabaab. It then goes on land, which is Al-Shabaab territory. Is there any chance that Al-Shabaab is not getting money off of this? I mean, recently there were a bunch of Somalis in America who were arrested for sending some small sum of money to Al-Shabaab. If you sent money to Al-Shabaab, you would be thrown in jail. But we can send millions and millions of dollars of food to these guys, which they're going to take and make money off. There's no way they're not stealing that money. Think about that incentive for them. Why wouldn't they take it? You would take it if you were them. I mean, it just seems impossible. Now, I met with a guy who's a very senior guy in the UN security, and I said, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He said, yeah, that's basically what's happening. These food programs use about 4 distributors there. Clearly, those people are all people who Al-Shabaab has approved to go through their territory. Now, it only happens, it's virtually impossible to think it's happening without a rent payment. Okay. So the failure, I just want you to realize in this part, this is not just coming from me. Do your own research. And just so you have some idea, that's just a quick rundown of some books that are on the subject of NGO failure. And I want to know, this is pre-Haiti. None of these books were written about Haiti. The amount of books that are going to come out, and articles that are already there about NGO failure in Haiti, is going to double the amount of books out there. Because they're not all created equal. So, if you want, I'll tell you at some point which ones, if anyone wants to ask me after. Okay, so this gets to my real point here, which is this is built to fail. This system shouldn't work. It would be amazing if it did work. All these books talk about the failure, this failure, that failure. I want you to see that the system is designed to fail. The first thing is, generally speaking, this is going to be about maximizing value to the nonprofit organization, NGO, not the aid recipient. If you look at NGOs, these NGOs, they're spread all around the world, but they'll have offices in D.C. Why? USAID, based in the big U.S. donor program, based in D.C. They'll have offices in London. They'll have offices in Geneva, where the UN is. They'll have offices in Nairobi, because that'll control African aid. Then they'll have as many little projects going on around the world as possible. But the key is, be where your customer is. Who's their customer? It's not the guy in Somaliland. It's not the person in Africa. Their customer is the guy who writes the check. I mean, this makes them very different from businesses. You might hate Microsoft, you might hate Walmart, but the bottom line is Walmart has to provide you something you want to buy because you are their customer. That's not the case here. The NGO's customer is sitting in Washington, D.C. It's a politician. Which brings to a very important point here, something that just isn't really discussed. NGOs are not corporations. This is not Home Depot. There are economies of scale in this world, and there are diseconomies of scale. And not every business, I mean, if you think about all the multinationals out there, but you still go to a little restaurant around the corner. Not every restaurant is turned into a multinational. There's both. And in some industries, they're not any multinationals. Some industries haven't scaled at all. Because there are some things that make it very valuable to do scale, and some things that go the other way. You're not going to run a steel plant that only provides the steel for this school. It's not going to work. You need to have massive size if you're going to do something like that. And there's a few major things you can look at that are themes in the corporate world, but it doesn't just work for the corporate world, about why you benefit from scale. And one clear advantage is you get buying power. If you have a lot of scale, Walmart has a lot of buying power. When Ford wants to make cars, Ford can buy steel a lot cheaper than you can. They can buy all the parts a lot cheaper because they have massive buying power. That's one. A second thing that makes a big difference is branding. I mean, I've moved many times in my life. Somaliland aside, if I moved to Phoenix, and I'm thinking I need to go get some hardware or something, I think, where's the Home Depot? Have I checked out the Home Depot in Phoenix? No. But Home Depot works for me somewhere else. I know it's going to be the same, so I go there. If you are driving somewhere and you're thinking, I could use a cup of coffee, and there's a Starbucks, you go to the Starbucks. That's a huge economy of scale. 1 + 1 does not equal 2 when you're talking about Starbucks branding. 1 + 1 equals something far more than 2. And the same thing can be true, the same thing is true on companies for buying power. Starbucks buys coffee beans a lot cheaper than the little store down the street can buy coffee beans. The other thing is in manufacturing, certainly you get a lot of scale. Now, NGOs, they don't manufacture, no advantage there whatsoever. They have no buying power, they don't buy anything, really. They pay a bunch of people to fly around the world. They don't really buy anything, so there's no real buying power. In fact, the one thing they do buy is food, and I'm pretty positive they actually pay more than actually they should. They actually pay more than average, not less. And then when you look at travel between cities, I guess if somebody, no one's going to be in Save the Children's place in Somaliland, and then they happen to be now in Ethiopia, so they say, hey, I think I'll check out the Save the Children's store. That seems like a good place for me to get some aid work done for me. That doesn't work that way. There are no economies of scale in this business. None. Now look at diseconomies of scale, which is just the opposite. Every business, massive diseconomies of scale in businesses. Walmart would have, Home Depot would have huge diseconomies of scale, except that they have great systems in place to get data. So if you're Walmart, you know exactly what your inventory looks like daily in all your stores around the world. You can say, how come sporting goods aren't selling in Worcester? How come something else isn't going right in Florida? We've got to go check that out. The CEO of Walmart can't be in every store at once. He can't manage everything at once. So that's what they need. They have revenue. They say, how come that revenue isn't working? Wait a minute, why is that costing us too much there? They have all these systems to control it. And the industries that haven't haven't been able to gain scale are ones that have these diseconomies of scale. Now, if you're an NGO, you don't have anything like that. You don't have revenue. You don't have any way of looking. Save the Children, which is based, I believe, in Connecticut, and does things all over the world. How does Save the Children say, hey, our Somaliland, people aren't liking our product in Somaliland? That's not their customer. Those people aren't paying anything. And this is a big, big problem. You don't get this customer data that you're supposed to get. You don't have the systems in place. So the diseconomies of scale, the major diseconomy of scale is management. Once you have 2 stores in an operation, you can't see everything. So you have to look at numbers. You have to look at data. You have to see what's happening. Once you have 1,000 stores, it becomes ridiculous. Then you have to, absolutely must have excellent management systems and information gathering systems. What we have in the NGO world is nothing to have that happen. That's a major, major disadvantage. Their revenue is not going to change if their programs are great or their programs are terrible, because those aren't the people paying. So, what do? They become huge multinationals. So you have an industry that's designed, the whole design of it says you can't possibly scale up. You have every disadvantage to scale, you have no advantages to scale. So what do? They're multinationals. That's what they are. Save the Children all over the world. SOS, 125 countries, something like that. CARE, Mercy, all these things, massive. They've gone the exact other way, and yet they have no P&L, so profit and loss statement that means anything. Their profit and loss statement you can predict every year. However much funding they get, they spend. That's what the profit and loss statement is. It doesn't mean anything. And just so you can actually understand how this industry works, this is the middleman's dream. You pay taxes. The taxes go to the U.S. government. U.S. government gives the money to USAID. They give it to the NGO. They give it to a local NGO. So Save the Children doesn't even do it themselves most of the time. They give it to somebody else. And then that guy subcontracts it. I mean, there's a group called EDC, who's a USAID they're a contractor NGO USAID gives money to. And we recently looked at a proposal, a request for proposals they did, and it includes room for our proposal to subcontract it further. Now, even if you just do the math on a lot of these groups taking a nice 30% overhead cut, even on that, there's not going to be anything left. But that's not even your major problem. It's a major problem, don't get me wrong. All these people taking 30% leaves extremely little left. But that's not the major problem. The major problem is there's no control in the system. So when it gets to that subcontractor in the end, there's no way for you, the taxpayer, to have any idea if that worked or not. Now compare that to a Walmart that's in Worcester, that every single day the CFO of Walmart can see results from. Now is he going to look at that every day? No. But he's going to have somebody under him who is going to look at the New England market. And when something looks bad, that guy's going to go and say to the CFO what's going on. And then they're going to jump on it immediately. This is an absolute middleman's dream and accountability nightmare. It would be incredible if these people actually followed what they do. You just need one break on the chain to have this not work. Okay, so, given that it's designed not to work, you'd think what you need to do is put some things in place to try to make it better, right? So, okay, the industry, generally aid is hard to do. We don't have revenue, we don't have real revenue. Our customers aren't the ones paying. This is a hard thing. We're multinational, we shouldn't be. A lot is going against us. So what are we going to put in place to try to make it so we can counteract that? And what you'll see is, nope, they went the other way. First, it's bad enough not to have revenue. But let me tell you how the industry actually works. It's one thing to say that the people of Somaliland aren't our customers, they're not paying us. But these people, these NGOs pay you to go to the seminars. Recently, USAID was interested in doing more work in Somalia. So they flew 50 Somali businessmen of different sorts to Djibouti, which is a nearby country. They flew, no reason they couldn't have held it in Hargeisa. There are hotels that can hold 50 people. No reason they couldn't have held it in Somalia, but they did. So they fly them to Djibouti. They stay in a hotel, which I've seen, which actually I think I got kicked out of for not wearing nice enough clothing to. It is a $500 a-night hotel. They stay there for 5 days. On top of that, they get $80 a day just as a stipend just for doing this. When these NGOs run programs in town, they'll pay people $15, $20 a day. That's actually a lot of money for people working there. You hear, I haven't checked this with my own eyes, but you hear stories that you have actually professional conference goers. I mean, $15 here, $15, and just keep going to conferences. Every day I'll just go to a conference. If I'm the guy running the NGO, there's no accountability, so it doesn't matter. Who do I care? All I need to say is 50 people got trained in my conference. I don't actually need to train them. No one's ever going to test that. There's no way for me to prove that. No one's going to ask, so I don't care. So what do? I pay these people. So my incentive is call up the same 50 people and have them come every time. It's easy. And their incentive is become a professional conference goer. Pays. You get lunch. It's a good deal. This concept, negative revenue, it means that you can't trust the customer at all. The customer may not have any interest in what you're doing. And every time I've met with these people, they say, well, the people don't want to come otherwise. I mean, if you can't put on a conference, which costs ridiculous sums of money, that anyone will go to if it's not free, if it's not paying them, then maybe your conference isn't any good. I mean, you need to put something that's half decent out there. Okay, next. This might be a little counterintuitive. The next thing they do is they overpay the staff. NGO workers in small end look at $60,000, $70,000 a year. Now that is not a massive paying job until you think of this. If you're a foreign worker, you actually don't pay U.S. taxes on the first, I believe it's $80,000 that you earn. So, or approximately 80. So these people actually aren't paying taxes. Plus, the NGOs take care of all their expenses. They fly them, they house them, they feed them. Everything is covered. So these people are netting that entire money. These are people who are not good, but they are netting that much money. There's no way they could get that anywhere else. So actually what you've done is you've created something. You could say, well, that should attract talent. Actually, the problem here is you have no accountability. You have to look and keep thinking you're in a world of no accountability. And without accountability, you can't afford for someone to be in it for the wrong reason. And when you're paying these sums of money, you're begging people to be in it for the wrong reason. You're saying, hey, it's a good paying job. Lots of people will go. That doesn't mean they care. And this is a must to have people who care, because you can't actually check on their work. You've got 120 countries, you've got things all over the place. You can't check and see if the guy's doing his job. So, you have to make sure that they're actually not being paid much. Instead, they pay extra. Next, they'll do an audit. This is complete meaningless stuff. First of all, most of the time it's done internally. They don't even send an external auditor out there. Walmart's not allowed to have an internal auditor be the guy who says whether or not their books are true. But that's not even the major problem. The main problem is the audit itself is a joke. In the audit, they'll have somebody who's flying in from somewhere a week who will say, it says here you spent $1,500 on rent. Where's the receipt? Check. Okay. You spent $2,500 on this. Where's the receipt? Check. Okay. All that means is you spent the money. No, I don't doubt that you spent the money. That's not the issue. The issue is, how did you spend the money? Should rent have cost you $1,500? Do you need to pay the employees so much money? I mean, I talked to a guy at a demining organization who gets, I think it was £30,000 a year, $45,000. And I said, would you do this for £10,000 a year? He said, absolutely. I mean, this is a blue-collar worker. This is not somebody who was going to be netting $40,000 a year if he was in England. He was going to be netting a few $1,000s a year. That's great, high money for him. These audits don't check that. Another thing that's completely lost in these audits, and here's an example I can give you, UNICEF. UNICEF supposedly does education. They actually don't teach a single student as far as they can tell, so that's why I say supposedly does education. They do build schoolhouses. That's something that they do. So they build schoolhouses, and all that's going to be checked on this is whether or not they have a receipt. Now, when you think about that, you've got a contractor in Somaliland who certainly doesn't care about UNICEF. The money from UNICEF is as distant from him as if it came directly from God. That means nothing to him. There's nobody who's losing that he'll ever meet in his life from him overcharging UNICEF. You've got an employee at UNICEF who is so distant distant from the taxpayer. Now you're talking about taxpayers pay the government, who pays a completely world government, whatever you want to call the UN, who then gives it to a UN agency, who gives it to the nations area, who gives it, again, the amount of hands involved, the chances that the guy in Somaliland and UNICEF cares is very, very unlikely. So, it's a $20,000 schoolhouse. I get a construction company to pay $40,000, to say it's $40,000. He gives me a receipt for $40,000. We split the other 20, 50, 50. How does an audit where you just check receipts ever pick that up? It couldn't. I would love to actually take 4 contractors to these UNICEF schoolhouses and have them each give me a bid on it, a real quote, and compare that to what they spent. But they're not asking me to do that. At least not yet. I'm trying. All right. The next thing that they do, again, let's go back to my theme here. You're in a world of no accountability. In a world of no accountability, you should at least try to do things that are as measurable as possible. Right? I can't measure revenue, but I somehow have to measure something that tells people whether or not I succeeded. So what do? They do their best to not be measured. No one offers end-to-end solutions on anything. UNICEF has something like 4 different things they do in education in Somalia. They build schoolhouses, they'll train some teachers, maybe, they'll provide some materials, and some formula, I can't remember what it is. It's not like they're doing a whole solution for somebody. So you could say, hey, how come no one's learning in that? So you hear, yeah, there's school buildings that have been built that actually have no teachers. I went to some very rural village, and I met the teacher there. She was 14 years old. And she didn't have, I don't think she's completed intermediate schooling. But UNICEF built them a building. No one can actually check on production, on how valuable what you provided is, if you make sure you don't do any end-to-end solutions. So not long ago, I, by mistake basically, was in a room full of educators on the NGOs who are educators. There are maybe 25, 30 NGOs there. If I had asked, please raise your hand if you actually educate a single person. It can be an adult, it can be a child, anything. But I'm not talking about you give money to somebody else. I'm not talking about you teacher train, you supply whatever. I'm talking about, do you run a school? Do you do something that actually provides education? We surveyed the rest of the world and we said, where does education happen? They'd say, schools. Okay, how many of you actually have a school? There wouldn't be a single hand in the air. The conference was actually about, the guy said some completely unintelligible thing, like it's the seminar to discuss the coordination proposal for the presentations we'll be giving next week, something like that. So I go to the area for the high schools, and there's 2 groups there. There's a group called African Educational Trust, who gets involved with running the examinations in Somaliland, and there's Handicap International. And they're supposed to spend the morning discussing coordination efforts to make sure they don't overlap. I mean, if you need 4 hours to figure out how Handicap International doesn't overlap with somebody running tests, it's a strange system. So you avoid measurable outcomes. And this gets to really what I'd say has been their model, which is if you teach a man to fish, you can run seminars for a lifetime. It makes complete sense that people would think. I mean, the whole thing makes sense, right? Buy a man a fish he only eats for a day. But at least he had a fish. I mean, these seminars are useless. They're constantly running these 3-day trainings. What can you learn in 3 days? We'll talk about, there's proposals out there. There's different programs going on right now where you're supposed to train people in 2 months. And I say, well, we're talking about training them to be accountants. Accountants, financial managers. You think we can do that in 2 months? They can barely add right now. Their English is non-existent. But we're going to do that in 2 months? It's better than these 4-day ones. But the whole thing is they just keep running these programs. Massive amounts. And if you get back to the book I mentioned earlier, The White Man's Burden, what this guy William Easterly, what he talks about is they love big solutions for big problems. That's what they love. It's big problems. Africa, it's a big problem. African education. So we need a big solution. So we say, we're going to educate, we're going to provide this super high-end boarding school. It's going to really produce that doesn't mean anything. They want big things. There's a guy who I absolutely can't stand. He's a completely useless man who's in charge of a lot of money, which I think makes me have a right not to stand him. He's head of the European Union's donations to Somalia. And this man, at one point, I'm trying to discuss, he's never come out to see our school, he's never seen us in the program we have, but he keeps funding these useless operations over and over again. And at least the new ministry in Somalia seems to be figuring out that nothing seems to be working, that none of these things seem to work. But in a classic example of this, the guy said to me, "You're talking about hundreds of kids? I'm talking about curing poverty." Like, wow, this is like, it's almost as if you William Easterly's White Man's Burden, like you tried to give him a new quote for the book, or you're trying to help me write a book in the future. Because you're curing poverty? I mean, that's a goal? I mean, sure, it's a goal, but does that sound like, for an industry that has fallen on its face for 30, 40 years, Africa's actually gone backwards. Statistically, Africa has gone backwards in the last 30 years. And you're saying, I'm curing poverty? I hope there's some middle steps before you try to get to there. You're not just jumping right there. So, let me give you a counterexample of how something, before this sounds like it's just totally negative, how something could be set up in a different way. The Abarza Tech example. So the first thing, and this is actually one of the things I learned at Worcester Academy. I don't even know if it's true, but I've been quoting this for some time now. I had a teacher who told us about what the Spanish did, what Cortez did. Cortez lands in America, and the first thing Cortez does is he burns his ships. And he says to his guys, "I guess you're screwed now. We better make this work." Now, in our case, we are completely in it. I am there. You're going to have to kill me before I'm leaving that country. There is no chance. I've personally invested money in it. This is not something that makes me money. I lose money on it, but this is something that I am there. You're not getting me out of it. Now, recently, there was something that was started at Hargeisa University, kind of copied us, but I have no problem with that. And they said, you took American teachers, you're teaching English, we should do the same thing. So they actually brought in some American teachers. The difference was that it wasn't really managed. So it didn't have, and they hadn't burned their ships. So basically, when we made errors, and we certainly made errors, we burned our ships. So you didn't say, I guess we're going home. When you burn your ships, you say, that didn't work, let's figure out how to make it work or make something else work. But we're not, turning back is not an option, so don't even talk about it. Basically, these people decided, and it really was a noble attempt, but it was too hard. 12, 13, 14, 15 teachers, it's about the same number we have, except we're having them for 100 kids, and they have theirs for 3,000. That doesn't work, and it burns people out. Now that's fine. You can make an error. Nobody calculates everything right. Believe me, we have not calculated everything right in advance. However, you need to actually be there to see it through and figure out how do we change this, how do we make it work. But you don't have people who burn their ships. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. You're just going to turn back. So that's one key thing we did. The next, our staff is not there for the money. I don't have to be there and oversee them to tell you our staff is not there for the money. And I know that because we pay them $3,000 a year. We've had 2 different PhDs in science come to the school to teach. And these guys can certainly get, they're both, one of the most recent ones, a PhD from England in chemistry. Most certainly he can earn more money elsewhere. If he's with us because he wants to be with us and wants to be doing something to help. He's not there for the money. So this is one good way of counteracting the negative incentives that are out there. Another, we have one country and we have executives on the ground. I'm here right now, but I'm there 10 months a year. I can see it. I can see what happens. And I've talked to the teachers. What if we tried to set up a school in Nigeria? What if we tried a program in Nigeria in addition? What would happen? Would it help Abarza Tech Somaliland schools? And absolutely not. It's the exact same thing I talked about before. There's no economy of scale we get by doing that. Absolutely none by going into another geography. Now managing it, that would be very difficult. So if we could pull it off, Okay, maybe it would help, but 1 plus 1 wouldn't equal 2. It certainly wouldn't equal 3. It definitely would be something lower than 2. It have to be lower than 2 because we can't manage in multiple places. So one school, it's not one school, we have a bunch of programs with one location. Next, no buying customers. You don't pay people to go to your programs. We will not pay people to go to our programs. Our programs, if you get into our boarding school and you can't pay, and you really think you can't pay, you'll go free. That's the best we do. If you want to be in one of our other programs, we have a tutoring program, we have an MBA program, we have an undergraduate university program, you pay. If you want to be in it, you pay. The undergrads who are very good and very talented and can't pay, we give a loan to. And we say, you're only going to be able to pay us back. This is more money than we can possibly pay back unless we succeed and you succeed. Unless we all actually get you to a point where you can actually get a real job that pays you, that allows you to make enough money to pay us back. We're in it with you on this one. We're not buying it. We're not doing that. We're not trying to show things to other people. We're paying you to come. The next thing is we watch our costs. I mean, we really watch our costs. And when we generate revenue, we try it. Now, that doesn't mean that the kid qualifies to our boarding school and we say you can't go, because that goes against our mission. Our mission isn't to make money. But in the process, if we have people who can pay, we expect you to pay. I mean, some of the parents are stretched thin somewhat to pay us, but it helps prove the point that they value the school. It helps an outsider look at it and say, if they didn't like the program, I mean, our MBA program is $1,800 a year. Now, that's not a lot for an American MBA program, but it's a lot to some. No one is in that who doesn't think that's worth it. So that's what that tells you. And when you put that together, watching costs and generating revenue, we also provide an end-to-end product. There's no avoiding blame. We say on our undergraduate, in the last year, funding permitted, our undergraduate students are going to take the first level of the Chartered Financial Analyst exam, which is the only one you're allowed to take while still an undergrad. That's an internationally recognized exam. If they don't pass, I guess that was our fault. I guess we didn't do our job. We can't say, hey, we just built the schoolhouse. We don't staff it. We just staff things. We don't actually operate it. We don't have any excuse. If our kids don't get into schools, if our boarding students don't do well on the SAT, that's our fault. You can look at us. We're not trying to hide. On the results, we have actually clear results people can see. They can see how their students are doing. Everyone who comes across our students in Somaliland say, wow, the English of those students is better than the graduates from the universities here. It allows, and that's created huge demand. We get lots of demand from people there because we actually can show the results of things. Another thing, having this culture of productivity, of actually valuing what we're doing, of actually trying to say, our goal is to educate students here, and we're going to do it at the lowest possible cost we can, and we're going to do it the best we possibly can. In that process, it actually gets away the people who wouldn't want to be with you. They're weeded out. They'll weed themselves out. They'll self-select out, and gets the people you wouldn't want. The revenue generation shows it's a valuable product. At this point, this is an interesting point. We now have a boarding school with 100 students in it that we feed. We do everything with it. We have an MBA program. We have this undergraduate school of finance. We have a tutoring program with adult English. And we're actually doing that for a net cost, and I mean a net cost because we do generate revenue from some of those programs, of less than 1 or equal to 1 NGO staff member. So you could either have what we have and have 100 people, another 20, another 30, another 50, and another 50 on top of that, being educated at a high level, or you could pay 1 American to sit in a hotel room in Somalia. In summary, international aid at its best, I guess there's probably been an exception or two, but I don't know of them, at its best doesn't do anything. And at its worst has caused massive problems. I mean, funded dictators. Look up the Central African Republic and their history. Look up Congo. Look up these places and see what's happened. In the current system, aid absolutely should not work. Because there's no, as we discussed, don't consider these failures. When you hear about a failure, please stop thinking of them as a fluke. That's not a fluke. It would be a fluke if it worked. And finally, as with everything else, use your brain and analyze the incentives. Just look at it, think for yourself on these things, and just see, why should it work? People are constantly doing things. I mean, this is very well, the whole field of economics is based on people maximizing value. It's based on incentives that maximize personal value. The whole field is based on that. Think about that in the context of NGOs and think, what would happen if we just apply a simple economic model to NGOs, of people trying to maximize value for themselves? And what would happen is all the disaster that you've seen here. And that is it. Any questions that anyone has? Oh, that third. Go ahead.
What do you think of the microfinance, the programs where you can volunteer to loan money directly to people who are trying to do stuff on the ground?
Right. Okay. The question was what I think of microfinance and our programs of volunteering money to help people on the ground. If microfinance can actually pay for itself, like if these loans are good loans, why do we need you to donate money? I mean, if the only thing lacking for these people in this microfinance cases is they just don't have the capital to get started. There's no one there to make, because that's the argument of microfinance. There's great things that can happen if you just give the people $100. If they could just get this $100 loan, they can figure out what the heck happened. That's great. If that's the case, I don't know why generally the for-profit business should be able to take care of it. I think that one thing I do like is that I do like that concept. I do think that telling people, you get this loan, you make it work, great. You don't make it work, you're not getting another loan. That's good. There's some actual accountability. If you then apply that accountability to the microfinance institution, you'd have the same. But if these microfinance institutions are basically just bleeding money, taking all of your donor money, giving it to people, and then the people don't pay back, then I don't know what makes that any different than any other sort of NGO out there. Does that make sense? And I do think some of them have, by the way, succeeded in that. So I think very highly of that if that works. Yes?
If there's been all these, given that there's been all these books written and publicly documenting failures, why do you think it's not being addressed?
Well, it's a good question. So the question is, with all these documented failures, why isn't anything actually happening in addressing this and changing? And I think that well, one of the reasons I think is that they do change. They keep recycling some version of the same system. They'll say, World Bank or somebody will say, now we do, or I get them confused, but one of them say IMF, World Bank, now we do structural adjustment loans, we used to do this other kind of loan. So they kind of, now you have to show that you're making some progress, which I think the White Man's Burden guy calls it, it's like a most improved thing. If you show, okay, I was doing genocide last year, this year the genocide numbers have come down, you can get a loan. So they kind of shift what they're doing a little bit. But my issue with it, and it's part of maybe an answer to your question, is I don't think there's a lot of discussion about the heart of the matter. At the heart of the matter, people want to donate to the kid in Africa. And you're right to want to do that. And people want to help a kid who can be helped for very little money. And certainly to no fault of his own or her own is in a bad situation. You want to do that. So that makes sense. And you want to think that it helps. But at the same, and it's very easy for places, for Save the Children, for all these places to show these kids and get you to call up and donate. And it's very easy for you to call your congressman and say, what's going on? How come really need a totally different style. You need to completely turn it on its head. And one of the other problems is that guys like William Easterly with White Man's Burden, his conclusion is, he writes in the book, dump the thing, end it, no more aid. It's not that I don't, he basically says, it's not that I don't care, it's that you can't do it. So just end it, stop it. You're causing harm. So first stop causing harm. And no one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear you're abandoning. They'll say, yeah, but what about those starving kids who we're trying to get that food money to? So, well, maybe they wouldn't be starving if they didn't have a dictator for the last 30 years who was basically living off your food money. But people don't want to hear that. Yes?
It's clear how you feel about Save the Children, but I know that for a long time you supported Children's International, and you obviously felt that one was different. So how do we know which ones are worth supporting?
Well, first of all, I would say, as your twin brother said to me many times when I was young, a fool and his money will soon be part. And I don't know that actually the Children's International donations I did were any better. I think it really, I actually know exactly how they came. I remember exactly how they came about. I watched the TV ad and I thought, enough is enough. I'm going to help. And you think, it makes you feel better. It does, it makes you feel better. I'm doing my part. And you're not thinking, maybe I'm doing my part to support a dictator. And maybe I'm not doing my part here. Maybe I'm actually hurting the world. How do you know? I would say, based on what I was in the presentation, use some rules of thumb. If it's a multinational, I really think you're almost impossible for it to work. There's one that seems okay to me that's a multinational. I'm sure it's pennies on the dollar that's getting through, but it does seem like they cause more good than bad. But generally speaking, if it's a multinational, just forget it. If you know somebody, if you have some way, you have to say, where's the accountability? Are the executives making money? I don't think the executives, I think there are enough good, meaning people in the world who have enough money that the executives of these major organizations don't need to make money. If you can't find an executive for these companies, these organizations that don't make money, then I don't want a guy who's a professional. I don't want a professional in that way. I don't want somebody who's a mercenary. That's not who's going to make Save the Children work, or one of those Save the Children type things. So I think it's more of things you could X out. You need some way of getting accountability. Somebody, yes?
Yeah, is there something that students here would be able to do to help a middle school or another big organization?
What a good question. So the gentleman there has a hat that he's going to pass around now. Yes. One thing that I think is helpful for the students here and the students there is just increased communications. Students in Somaliland is it's incredibly homogeneous society. And that's fine in some ways, but in other ways it reduces learning. Definitely, it's pretty well documented that interactions over the years are what made cultures grow, what made places grow, and what makes people grow. So more of that is definitely better. I'm more than happy for you to do some fundraisers to try to support one student, two students, things like that. That would be wonderful. Another thing that students here could try to do if they're interested in your own college searches, you can actually try to get colleges aware of our students and try to actually have colleges in the U.S., because that's our goal, is to have our secondary school students ultimately be able to, they can't get the level of education they need to get if they stay in their country. The country's still devastated by previous wars, and it takes hundreds of years to build the types of institutions that are available for higher education in this country. So we could certainly talk more about that, but actually talking to colleges here and making them aware, because that's a big first step. It can't be a shock to them when suddenly they see a resume coming